Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 447th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we might interrupt her. We listen only one fool at a time. That's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience, not speeches of the speaker. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. And our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, and a comment to close the meeting. That's how it works. But before we introduce our speaker, it's time for announcements. Anyone have any announcements they want to make? Now's the time to do it. Any announcements? John? No announcements? Nobody has? Do I? I'm trying to think, what am I supposed to be announcing? I can't think of anything. Am I missing something?
Valentine's.
Oh, what about it?
Never mind.
It's Valentine's Day has already passed.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to those of you who didn't. He's here.
Give their wife a call. Oh, there you go.
Well, our speaker next week is Kenneth Williams. He's the president of RDC, the Rowlett Democratic Club. He's going to talk about why Republicans are determined to rule as a minority. It's in your itinerary. I'm not going to read all this.
Julie's here.
And on March 2nd, Jim Gatewood will be our speaker. He's going to talk about Captain Will Fritz and the Dallas Mafia. That ought to be interesting. We have another speaker for March 9th. It's still in progress, so I won't report on that at this point. Anyway, our speaker tonight is John Beesley. He's going to talk about reform for real MAGA, make America great again. He's an English-born author. He's retired after a long career with Xerox. He's educated at London's Imperial College and University of Dallas. He will discuss how the United States, like the United Kingdom, does not pay its own way in the world. He argues that the underlying socio-economic reasons for this are complex and deep-seated. However, it's internal rather than external factors that are the root cause of the problem. John will examine each of these factors in some detail with proposals for reform that contain essential provisions for ongoing review and self-correction. He concludes asserting that increased laissez-faire will not do the trick. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to John Beesley.
Well, thank you for coming, chaps and chapesses, especially on this cold and frosty night. And anyway, so tonight I'm going to talk about how we should really, what things we have to do to make America great again. In looking at what Trump does and proposes, it's essentially negative. I mean, so he blames foreign people and foreigners for America's troubles. You know, let's build a wall to keep the foreigners out. Let's stop trading with people, and let's go around insulting our friends. I mean, that's really seems to be his major theory. Well, I think that the thing one really must do is come up with a more positive outlook. So let's start. Well, it turns out that both the U.S. and the United Kingdom do not pay their way in the world. That's to say they have a trade deficit, and America's had it for 40 years, ever since the great Ronald Reagan appeared on the scene. And so the reasons for this, of course, are a series of very poor governments in both countries, bad socio-economic dogma, and special circumstances, which you can ask me about later. Now, before I start into this, I'd like to go through some definitions so we know what we're talking about when I talk about various things. I'm going to define what fiscal policy is and monetary policy. Now, fiscal policy is the amount of government spending. And of course, if you increase spending by the government, that boosts the economy. If you decrease it with austerity, it decreases the economy. And then you have monetary policy, which is really the amount of money in circulation, which is controlled by the Federal Reserve. And it's really controlled by changing interest rates. And so, now I'll talk about government debt and deficits. Now, during the Depression, unemployment in 1937 stood at 18%. Because of austerity actually imposed on the FDR by the Congress, the economy slowed a bit and the unemployment went up a bit to 18%. Then in 1944, in about the middle of the war, the unemployment rate was 2%. And basically speaking, this was caused by the huge fiscal spending, government spending during World War II. And so this, of course, caused the government debt to increase. And in fact, in the middle of the war, the government debt rose to 120% of the gross national product. And so after the war, of course, America was booming, but so gradually this debt was paid down. And so the lowest point was in 1981, when the debt had been decreased to 31% of the gross national product. And so, of course, the famous Ronald Reagan came into power then and began to spend. Usually it's Democrats accused of tax and spend. Well, in fact, it's really quite the opposite. What happens is the Republicans cut taxes and increase spending. And so between Reagan and Bush Sr., the debt, national debt, was pushed to over 60% of the gross national product by 1992. And then Clinton came along, and in fact had several years of budget surpluses, and this decreased the debt. So by 2001, the debt was decreased to 58%, and it was a reduction. And so basically, actually, the Democrats have a bit of a problem, because every time they come into power after this cutting taxes, which we've seen Trump do, they actually have to reset the economy. And so the question is really, should they bother to keep doing this? And so anyway, so when W came, of course, the first thing he did was in 2001. The first thing he did was to reduce taxes. I mean, that's what Republicans always do. And of course, then later in his tenure, in 2008, of course, we had the great financial crash. And so when Obama came in, it was a matter of fiscal spending. And of course, at that point, the national debt went over 100%. It's come down since. It's down to around 90. But of course, that was caused by the financial disaster. Now, Trump has tax cuts. Of course, they'll go through, and if nothing is done. So the national debt will increase by 10 trillion over the next decade. Now, it stands at 20 trillion. So this tax cut will increase the debt by 50%, which of course is, now the problem there is, of course, that the government has to pay interest on this debt. And also, in the years ahead, we'll see an increase, a necessary increase in Social Security spending because of the aging population with the baby boomers going through. And of course, this will put a drag on government, and of course it will hinder proper investment, which I'll come on to later. So I would say irresponsible tax cuts for the wealthy is really a very bad policy. So then I'll talk about the current account deficit, debt and deficits. Now the current account actually is the trade deficit plus all the flows that go out of America, all the money flows, and they're basically our investment and of course overseas spending on military and so on and so forth. So the whole thing put together, the trade deficit and the flows, that's called the current account. And so of course this current account debt is again caused by a negative trade balance, and it's been in deficit ever since 1980, and so and now it stands at about 100% of the GDP, about $20 trillion.
22.
Yeah, roughly, just over. And so actually, I've heard speakers get up and say, "Oh, it's wonderful. You know, we just pay in our dollars and we get all this lovely cheap goods." Well, yes, but as we know, there's no such thing as a free lunch, because this trade deficit must be paid for, and the only way you're going to pay for it is by selling U.S. assets, by selling government bonds, by selling businesses. And land and real estate. And that is very true of England. I mean, Theresa May stands up in Parliament and talks about we are open for business. Well, the business they seem to be in is just selling assets. I mean, even the wealthy in London can't buy London property anymore because it's basically been sold off to oligarchs and everyone else. And of course, that's an unsustainable proposition. And so what's the fundamental problem? Why has really all this happened? Well, basically it's corporate greed and their love of money and power control. And basically the greed, it just ruins everything. And of course, what has happened? Well, democracy itself has been corrupted. The financial system has been corrupted to a point where it's not fit for purpose any longer. And we've seen inequality in terms of pay for the average American compared to the wealthiest reaches sort of dangerous levels actually, where the 1% owns basically half the wealth of the country. And so figures show that 40% of Americans have less than $1,000 savings. So if there was a minor hiccup, loss of jobs, car problems, I mean, they're out of it, really. Also, we know that the real unemployment right now stands about 8.1%. And this is after 100 months of job growth. 8.1%. It isn't, because that counts everybody, the underemployed, the people who are looking for jobs have given up looking anymore. And what that amounts to is about 13.5 million people. That's about the whole population of Scandinavia. So you have this reserve army of unemployed and underemployed people whose talents and potential are not being used. And I don't believe any country can stand that sort of inefficiency. And of course, what's happened is that the middle wage earners have been hollowed out by globalization and productivity improvements. In fact, in the last 20 years, we've lost about 25 million manufacturing jobs. And this is on top of the jobs that were lost in the 80s and 90s. And so this accounts for the fact that the middle people have been hollowed out, the white collar people have been hollowed out. And so what we have is a highly skilled, at one end, the top end, we have a highly skilled and highly paid workforce. And at the bottom end, we have the low skilled, low wage earners. And right now, most of the working people, what the unemployment agencies tell us that 62% of the population are looking for better paid jobs. Because since the crash of 2008, they've not kept up with the costs. Another factor which I found out in the real estate market in Oklahoma, one of my tenants' mother owns something like 17 rent houses in Oklahoma. And every one of them is 2 to 3 months late in rent. So, there's something going on very bad in this country. And it shows up at the low end. And in these impoverished states that insist in voting Republican. Quite wise a mystery, but there you are. So let's talk about education. Well, in my judgment, it's poorly targeted. I'll talk about it later, and too expensive, and it's just not value for money. Healthcare, again, it's too fragmented, too expensive, and not value for money. Housing, there's not enough for the low end, and it's of poor quality. And how you get away with having cardboard and siding on houses, I'll never know, but that's what you see in many cases. And so, of course, all this means you have high social stress. It's a combination of all these factors I've just talked about. And this really has a high social cost with the strain and stress of living. This shows up in obesity, it shows up in healthcare needs and so on. And on top of that, we've had very bad socio-economic policy for the last 40-odd years. And so let's talk about what really we've had is laissez-faire on steroids. That really means reliance on the free market, free trade, and reducing regulations. That's what laissez-faire is. Which means to say the government can never do anything, it should go away and require, and the market will take care of everything. Well, in fact, this so-called free market does not necessarily produce the optimum equilibrium. In fact, the supply-demand conditions, as we saw in the 1930s, can result in an equilibrium where you have huge unemployment that can go on for a decade, actually. So the notion that the market will solve everything was proven false even then. It is not true now. And of course, if you look at the economic textbooks as taught today, you will see the supply-demand curve. Now, the demand curve, of course, is downward sloping because as things get cheaper, people demand more of them, they can buy more of them. And the supply curve slopes upwards because if the prices go up, then people make more of them, and so in this happy outcome, these two curves intersect at this wonderful optimum. Well, in a prior talk I gave, I pointed out that the supply curve is actually downward sloping. It's not upward sloping. And the reason for that, of course, is quite easy to see because it's the fact that these days the market out there is run by oligopolies, like Walmart, for example. And so Walmart can go into a small town, and I don't care how many competing mom and pop stores you have, Walmart can always put every one of them out of business. And that's because of the economics of scale. Obviously the more you make and the more you buy for a corporation, the cheaper it gets. And also there's a factor of the learning curve. The more you make of the same thing, there's a learning curve. It gets more efficient and less costly to make them. And that's a well-known curve. So the two together means that oligopolies, you look around, what an oligopoly is where you have the marketplace where you only have 2, 3, or 4 businesses that supply the market. And they do not compete. So what they do, they come down this curve to the point of maximum profit. So the market is not operating. It's operating to produce the maximum profit for the oligopolies. Now, this is not the necessarily cheapest price. So essentially, the market gets what the oligopoly provide at their price. Okay, and then basically, if small companies came in, they could be bought out and put out of business. So that's the market today. It bears no relation to the textbooks. You go down to SMU, you take a college in economics, you'll get total falsehood, actually. That's not the real world out there at all, for the reasons I've just said. And so, and the other fact of the matter is with oligopolies, the free market, so-called, depends upon what's called an arm's length transaction, which means the buyer and the seller has equal knowledge. Well, that's true. These days, it's obviously not true. Clearly not true. So the market in that sense, and of course, you see things like these, you can have an interest-free purchase. Well, there's no such thing as an interest-free, because in fact, when you read the agreement, you'll see that the finance companies are going to get their money anyway, and it's disguised in fees, but it's certainly not interest-free. So actually, Elizabeth Warren, years back, promoted the Consumer Protection Agency. Of course, she was never allowed to run it because the people that pull the strings didn't want her. And of course, it's been emasculated of late by the current administration. And so basically, what you could say is consumers are being fleeced in this country because of the reasons I've just said. And so then we come to another imperative in consumer is we need a fully staffed and operational Food and Drug Administration, because we're getting supplies of food and drugs from India and China. And goodness only knows what's in these drugs. I mean, whether they do any good or not, nobody really knows. And the big pharma will never divulge where the underlying ingredients for compounding drugs come from. So I hope none of you are going to be ill in the next. Good luck. So anyway, we badly need regulations whereby we know the origin of these drugs, and they really should be American made, so we know. Remember the big cry years back saying, "Oh, don't go to Canada because we don't know the quality of these drugs in Canada." Well, I would say Canada has a better quality drugs than here, because of course you have a more government-controlled system over there. And so anyway, let's get back to a favorite topic, the US Constitution. I would say it was written and it's tailor-made for corruption. So why is that? Well, what is this? You read the first few articles, and basically what the founding fathers did, they looked back 100 years to what the state of the political system was in England. So what they really said, well, we'd like a monarch, just like they have in England, and so, but we'll have one that's selected by the people. And so he can have his cabinet, and so on and so forth. So he can select people to walk off the street as of dubious quality with no particular experience, but they're good old mates. But they had to be approved by Parliament, actually. So similarly, in America, 300 years later, we have Trump and these people that have never seen any experience in government, but they're billionaire class, and therefore they appeal to Trump. Well, in England, of course, we've moved on, and we don't have a written constitution, so our political system is not stuck in aspic. When we're looking at what were they thinking about in 1776 and beyond, that nonsense of the Supreme Court and so on. No, we've moved on. In fact, there is. So we have a monarch, but the monarch does not have a cabinet. They're merely a figurehead. They're more of an ambassador for Britain. They go around the Commonwealth, the English-speaking peoples, and create goodwill. That's their main job. In an emergency, they can advise, but that's about it. No, we do have a cabinet, but it's in the Parliament, in the Commons. And so the Prime Minister heads up the cabinet, that he or she is elected, and every member of the cabinet is elected. So these are people who are not off the street, they're elected people. It's called democracy. Okay? So the other thing is, of course, the UK general election, which amounts to equivalent America, would be the election of the president and the Congress. That process lasts 4 to 5 weeks. Whereas in America, of course, we have basically we have midterms, and so we're in this election cycle. It's continuous, really. And so, what was the cost of this in America? Well, the cost of electing the president and the Congress was over $10 billion. Now, the equivalent cost in England to elect basically the same thing is 1% of that. So the scope for corruption, which you see in America, is just non-existent. It doesn't last long enough, and the money is not there. Now, in Japan, the cost is 0.1%. 0.1%. So you see, you can run things totally differently. But what I would say is this system is tailor-made for corruption. And it is corrupt. Because where does all this tons of money come from? Well, it obviously comes from the Wall Street and the big corporations. And the K Street bandits sit there bribing the senators and the Congress. And of course, when you pay that sort of money, we're talking about billions here, you write the legislation and you get what you want. So basically, the finance system is corrupt, and the whole the government gets corrupted, and we all know it. We laugh about it, and basically that's one of the reasons why the public have lost trust in the government. I mean, their approval rating, I don't know what it is today, but it's probably not above 20%. This system itself, you see, just leads itself to be corrupt. And so let's go to what Lincoln said at his Gettysburg Address. He said, we should have a government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. And now, I don't quite know what land he was living in, but I don't believe that was ever true. It would be great if it were true, but it's probably never true. It's not true nowadays. What you really have is a government for the elite, paid for by the elite. Basically, you have just plain bribery. And yet America goes around the world touting democracy and calling out Venezuela as being corrupt. And they say, oh, socialist. Well, take a good look in the mirror, folks. And so the elite really, basically, really don't give a damn about this country. And they don't give a damn about the people of this country either. Because they've got their money squirreled away anonymously in tax havens that, of course, are set up and run out of the financial system of the financial centres of London. So they're not worried, really, because they've got their monies no matter what happens. So really, if America had only waited and not been impatient, it would have had what most of the other English-speaking countries have, a parliamentary system, which, as I've just explained, why the potential for corruption is so much, much less. And as I joke, well, you know, you've got the Supreme Court, which is a bit of a joke. And of course, until Tony Blair, we didn't have a charlatan first of all. So, I mean, I could go on about England, probably to the same vein, so please don't think I'm anti-American. I'm just anti-poor government, no matter where it is, especially in England too. So I think a parliamentary system, is because the people who actually govern control the agencies of government have to be elected. And if a minister really screws up, as some do, they won't be elected, and that's happened. They stand, but people are fed up with them because they're so poor. Okay, so then we come to the financial system reform. Well, I think it's, especially in England, it's far too bloated. You have too many wealth absorbers in the system, and far too few wealth creators. So yes, the system does create wealth, but it's mostly channeled via what's called financial engineering, where people like Kerkorian will take over a company and re-engineer it and make a buck by actually, in the long run, destroying a company. And so, but this does not, by this system, really produce productive investments. And we do need productive investments in this country. So what would we do? Well, we should reenact all the legislation that's been expanded, that was enacted in the 1930s. We should reinstall the Glass-Steagall Act and go, plus things like the uptick rule. So there was a whole raft of legislation against this corruption of the financial system. Because really what's happened is this financial system just uses the money coming through it as a vast gambling pot. And so we needed to take away this pot, and doing so will reduce market manipulation. Because almost every market today is manipulated. Because you've got so much money, of course, you've got so much money, you can short the market. Of course, that was not allowed by that 1933 legislation. You couldn't short the market. You could only short the market if the market was going up, for example. But one of George Bush's guys, Christopher Cox, I think it was, changed the legislation in 2007, just in time for the big short a year later. And so what's really happened is in the 20th century, in the 19th century, when the corporations were being founded, you had investors. And these were replaced in the 20th century by speculators, to be replaced in the 21st century by manipulators. And so really the market itself, you see, has been corrupted. So what is this market manipulation that's gone on? Well, much of it is perpetrated by what's called shadow banks. Now shadow banks, the fact is that this trade deficit means that about $500 to $800 billion flow back into America from this trade deficit. Now this obviously has to be, so this is why, for example, I get offers every week to take cheap loans. I mean, if you have any at all. This is, and also to refinance. And this is why, because this money has to be invested back in America somehow. And of course it's foreign owned, So if I take out a loan, I'm actually paying somebody in Germany or China. And so, in fact, actually, in the run-up to the housing bubble, it was a lot of European money actually was funding that. So because of this reverse flow of money. So what have we seen? Well, we've seen interest rate rigging. We've seen wholesale arbitrage. We've seen money laundering. We've seen wild risk-taking with no downside penalty. We've seen enhanced normal volatility of the markets, which are driven up and down by buying and selling, which have no practical purpose. And we've seen supercharged economic bubbles, I mean the dot-com bubble and the housing bubble. And in any bubble like this, it's bound to end badly. And we've seen rating agency fraud. I mean, we've seen these mortgages, worthless mortgages, passed off with a AAA rating. And with all this crime going on, virtually nobody went to jail. I mean, really, they brought the economy of the West to its knees, and almost nobody paid for it. And most of these people that made all this crooked money got away with it. And of course, the biggest market, of course, is the Forex market, the foreign exchange market. And that runs at 3 to 5 trillion a day. And then the stock market is entirely unregulated. So big money can drive up and down the stock market. Say, I want to change dollars into pounds, English pounds. I have to go to the market. Now, the market gets driven, you know, if Theresa May says something in the House of Commons that looks like Brexit is, getting worse, then the pound will drop. So what does this mean? Well, in 2018, the value of the US dollar to the pound swung by 15%. And a few years earlier, over a 2-year period, the value swung by 33%. Now, I have no idea how you can possibly trade when you have these huge swings. Because, I mean, you're expecting to get, paid, and if this swing takes place and you deliver over a few years, you're going to end up 20%, 30% worse off. Now, the way around this, of course, is by hedging, which means you buy forward the money. But of course, that's like an insurance that costs you money. Now, currently in the market, the cost of hedging is deterring foreign buyers of US debt. So here's America depending on foreign buyers of debt to pay its way. And of course, the volatility has been such that they can't afford to do it. They can't afford to hedge much anymore. So let's go back to something which I raved about before, by a proposal by Lord Keynes in 1944 at Bretton Woods to introduce the Bancor as an international intermediate currency. Well, I won't go through that because I've lectured on that ad lib. And so what that does actually, it actually automatically balances trade. You cannot run a trade surplus and deficit under this policy. The other thing it does is causes currency stability. Currencies can change, but they do so in a controlled way. And so, well, what we have, and of course, some of you know I wrote a book called Sabotaging America, which I advise everyone to read, even the right-wing people here, because you will learn a lot. So I mentioned in that there's such a thing as the cozy money club. So what's the members of the cozy money club? Well, these are people who operate higher echelons of Wall Street. They then leave and join the Federal Reserve. They then leave that and go to the Treasury, and then they go back to Wall Street. And Timothy Geithner is a prize example of this. Now, Timothy Geithner left Wall Street and joined the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which had oversight of the financial operations of the banks of New York City, probably the most important post in the country, actually. And so he didn't notice the fact that these derivatives and trading was growing so much that the whole thing was going to blow up. But it did, and it was on his watch. But never mind. I mean, so he joined the Treasury under Obama, and then he went back to Wall Street. We had a chap called Hank Paulson, who was chairman and the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and then he became Treasury Secretary under W, and he was there at the time of the 2008 crash. Now earlier he killed the Lehman Brothers because Lehman Brothers engaged in repo, that's to say borrowing short and lending long. It's a very dangerous thing to do. When rates changed, they got pulled out. And of course, when the markets began to freeze up, they couldn't borrow short anymore. And so he didn't really like Lehman Brothers, so he let them fail. And then this spooked the whole market. Now the other interesting fact was that, of course, Goldman Sachs had several $1 trillion of derivatives hanging out in the market. And the TARP money that they administered bailed AIG out because AIG was the insurance agency that backed the derivatives. Now the Grand Master of derivatives trading in AIG was, and that really a derivative really is like an insurance policy. And so if the derivatives went bad, then AIG would compensate, you see. So there was a character called Joe Cassano who operated in London, of course, being financial crooks paradise in London these days. And he managed to earn, in several years, like 2, 3, 4 years, $280 million personally for selling $62 trillion of insurance, that's to say derivatives, for a premium of $14.5 billion. Now the only fly in the ointment was that AIG didn't have the money to back all this up. And so when the crash happened, some of these charlies thought, oh, well, that's fine. You know, I go collect insurance from AIG. Sorry, we don't have the money in the bank. And so, of course, they bailed out AIG, which in turn bailed out Goldman Sachs. So basically, you have a totally corrupt financial system, which really is playing funny money with our money, but there's no losses there for them. So as part of what I would do, I would set up what I would call the ECC, the Economic Control Council Committee, which would be set up 50% academics, 50% business, and it would set the fiscal and monetary policy of the country. It would set what fiscal monies could be spent, and it would set what the interest rate should be. And its job would really to create stability. So the Fed would exist only to perform this clearing function every day as it does now. And the Treasury could spend money only when it's allocated. So it's really perform an allocation fund of money. So anyway, let's come on to education. Well, I don't think it's value for money. Many other countries, like small Finland, for example, fund education right through college. Now, they're a country of 5 million people. So they can do it. I don't see why the US can't do it. But what I would do, I would set up, I would educate everybody to about 16 the same, roughly. From then on, it would be a 3-tier system. You'd have the academic route, through college. You'd have like a white-collar route, where people want to be in white-collar jobs. And then there would be a blue-collar route, which is really vocational training. So at the end of all of this, you would make sure that everybody would end their training period with a usable skill. Whereas now, many kids, they stay on at 18, and basically we're wearing out in kids that really apparently come out sometimes without being properly able to read and write. It's a criminal waste of money, and I can tell you I'm paying a fortune really in taxes to fund this educational system. But there's enough money there in the system if we want to do it properly. So everybody, whether they take arts degrees or technical degrees, finance degrees, political science, whatever you want to be, they would be experts, in their field. Because we really do need a properly educated population. And when we do what we do, allow these rip-off colleges to turn out nonsense, we're defrauding the country. So of course then we come to healthcare. Well, naturally I would advocate a national health system here, single payer system. Because basically it's so much more efficient. So that not only is it more efficient, but what the National Health Service does, it has a database of the effectiveness of medicines. And of course, because of its size, it negotiates with Big Pharma what the prices are. And so you see, you couldn't get away with all these fraudulent, bad drugs flowing into the market because there's a feedback mechanism that's tracking all these things. And so one day maybe America will do it. It's possible. But I recommend, because the money savings, it costs what 70% of the gross national product? No, that's 12 about. Well, so 10% will be 2 trillion. So you're talking of several $1 trillion actually, so it could be saved, and actually needs to be better spent elsewhere. But actually 10% would be 2 trillion. Anyway, so now we come to housing. My view is that every working family should earn enough to be able to buy their own accommodation of reasonable size and quality, subsidized if necessary by low interest loans. And in Germany that happens maybe over 2 or 3 generations. But this is what I think. We can have a good quality housing stock, and everybody should not only have their own their own means of livelihood, but own their own housing. So now we come to employment. And so in the late 1970s, Ronald Reagan, the former B-rated movie star, became the shill for the right-wing resurgence against the interests of the working people of this country. So his radio broadcasts heralded the rise of the neoliberal dogma. And so what was that? What did he actually preach? Well, firstly, he said that the greedy trade unions were responsible for the high inflation that happened, which was a total lie. It wasn't that at all. He said there were too many regulations holding back business. He said that personal and corporate taxations were too high, and this was stifling growth. And he said that there were too many people who are undeserving and were abusing the MAGA welfare system. He was talking about these welfare queens driving to the Social Security offices in their Cadillacs. So now that is typical right-wing rhetoric that we see in Britain too. There are too many shirkers and hard-working people having to support these shirkers. And of course, when he said all this, the US proletariat, as is their whim, agreed with him. And so Laissez-Fare was off to the races. And when he became president, basically all these goals he had were achieved at great cost to the country. And so what we've seen is a severe, increasingly severe financial boom and bust cycles roughly every 8 years. And 2008 was a beauty. And by the way, we're overdue for one right now. We've seen increasing US trade deficits that began in the early, and increasing federal debt. We've seen a loss of US international competitiveness. We've seen increasing inequality, which, as I said before, increases social strife and welfare costs. And I think we've seen a loss of democracy and a loss of trust in government. And so my view is that a national foundation is proper investment in a well-housed, well-educated, healthy population. So, my view is it's using the full human potential of the population in the end that will enable the US to pay its way in the world, and then we can have a MAGA. So wealth does not trickle down. I mean, the progress of the country is not determined by the brilliance of its billionaire class and the 0.1%. Wealth is created, as Marx said, by the surplus labor of ordinary people. Now, of course, that can be properly channeled, and I'll get to in a minute. And so what I would say is this 40 years of this neoliberal raw capitalism has definitely not done the job. And you can see it in the current strife in the country. I mean, basically that was one of the reasons why Trump was elected. I mean, he certainly had the right message, totally wrong policies, but he certainly hit some spots which the current political elite never touched, actually. So he hit a nerve. So what I would say is that capital has been squandered in this country and misdirected. And so my view is it needs to be redirected. The money and the wealth needs to be redirected into industries, innovative industries that can adequately support innovations and superstructure and so on. So that again, America will make products that the world wants to buy and can afford. Because basically, the logic of the current system is that the American worker should reduce his wages down to Chinese level, and that's the way you can get competitive. Well, that's a complete non-starter to begin with, but that's really the logical conclusion of what's gone on. And so now, so what we need therefore is a mechanism, a positive mechanism that might bring this about. So what I propose, we have an expanded small business administration, because it's the small businesses that start and put together form the bulk of the wealth generation of this country. It's not the huge corporations, in fact. In fact, what they've done is ship wealth overseas. So what we want is more small business, and not less. But we need a mechanism that's going to do that. So I propose that we enhance the functions of the Small Business Administration, whereby it becomes an employment agency, but moreover, a business creation agency. I mean, it forms a liaison with it knows the knowledge structure and the courses that go on in various colleges and universities in that community. And it understands the infrastructure, and it understands the demographics. And so if I go down and I want to do something in the way of a job, it would know which people are there, what talent's available, what supporting services would be there to be put together. It also acts as a funding agency, because I mean, as I said before, I would rather pay people to start businesses than pay them to be unemployed. And so basically what we're doing is we're paying about 8.1 million people to sit there unemployed and underemployed. And so we need a mechanism to cut into that. And so also it would do monitoring of startup businesses, and it would have financial oversight of them. And many will fail, but so what? In Silicon Valley, it's a badge of honor to start business and fail. Well, we want so that every young person of whatever creed, race, color, whatever you say, would know that there would be a job waiting for him. You know, and when I came to this country, and certainly in England, everyone had jobs, you know. And now we've got these host of very poor jobs, really, at the low end, because the top end is okay, you know, but the middle has been hollowed out, and then we've got this raft of very low-paid jobs. And we're not creating enough innovations, and we're, as I say, we're not using our resources productively. And so, once in this scenario, because of course, if we had a national health service, for example, you'd save a couple of trillion right there. So the money in this country is there for such things if the whole thing were run much more efficiently. So my deal is that if once this gets up and going, and you have success with it, then they return to the bond market. So just like a bond, you'd borrow money at a fixed rate for a number of years, and that's the way a modern capitalism would work. 5 minutes, okay. Well, I think I might finish. So, of course, along with this comes employee ownership. So the mantra is that you have an employee ownership, and this creates economic democracy, where everybody has skin in the game. And so, in fact, in such companies, you have John Lewis in England, you have Mondragon in Spain, and you have Publix supermarkets in Florida, all worker-owned. And they're all remarkably successful. John Lewis really is the most admired store on the high street. It runs big department stores and a food market chain. And so the worker owners, in fact, vote in who's on the board of directors, and of course the board of directors and hire and fire the officers of the company. Now, I mean, like Goldman Sachs, I mean, Hank Paulson, he was the CEO and the chairman of the board. Talk about conflict of interest. So anyway, so each individual owner would have the right to demand a written answer in a published company journal about any particular concern they have. It could be financial, could be conditions, anything. So the management has to answer to the lowest level person about what's going on. It's called democracy, economic democracy. And as Jim Peeler, who's ill, talked about working in such a company in Dallas, he said it has tremendous positive effects on the workforce. Also, each individual should be trained in ROI analysis, return on investment analysis, to enable economic analysis to take place at every level. Because when you're doing something, you should be able to work out, is this cost effective? When I joined Xerox, I did an economic analysis of one particular technology, and no one understood it actually, because very few people were trained in it. But you see, it's vital to know. And of course, Xerox owns the product, so you have to take into account the cost, the maintenance cost, and so on and so forth. But anyway, so everyone should be able to do it. So how are salaries paid? Well, I made a presentation at Oracle years ago when we founded the Helmsman Group. That salaries really should be paid depending on the percentage contribution to the bottom line. Now, how do you do this? Well, you can do it by causal analysis. When a plane crashes, there's an investigation. How did it happen? Who did what? And in Xerox, when I was in charge of making the 1200 computer printer well, I did that. So everything that happened to that machine in the field, we tracked back who was responsible, how did it happen, and so gradually, you see, we made it. We increased manufacturing, we improved this, and so on and so forth. So you have this feedback loop. So every person knows what they're contributing to the bottom line. There's a feedback loop, so they get rewarded. So you see, there's this learning curve effect where things get more productive by this feedback mechanism. As I say, I pitched this to Oracle, and of course, like everything else, selling ideas is so difficult. Really, everybody's afraid of new ideas. Well, I like new ideas. I think, I work for Xerox, and they invented the mouse, the Windows, and the lot, and the top management didn't see it. So Xerox should have been Microsoft and Apple rolled into one, because they did all the technology. Anyway, things happen. So I think this is how you get cheaper, better products. And this is what this country needs if they're ever going to pay their way in the world. Now, how do we pay? Basically, America's like a $20 trillion economy. There's roughly 100 million families. So that averages out of about $200,000 a year per family if it were equal. But if you say, well, we can't quite do that, well, let's have 6 bands. If you did 6 bands, there would be 17 million families in each band, and so the top would earn 6 times more than the lowest band. And so basically the bottom band average would be 60,000 a year. Top band would be 360 a year. So if that were the case, I say, most people could afford to buy a house, most families. So that would mean that a married couple would earn $15 an hour, the lowest end. Okay, that would bring in 60,000 a year. So what I'm saying is employee ownership drives productivity. And so a mechanism for easy business creation drives competition, and in fact lowers inflation. And there's there's stability mechanisms for keeping interest rates level, means to say that you can trade. So I think that 1% unemployment should be achievable. It certainly was achievable in Britain in the 50s. So that lowers social costs, and of course you have better healthcare outcomes and you'll have far far lower incarceration rates. So with all that, I think you'll have a happier, more efficient society, and this precariat that we have of people living on the edge will be no more. Thank you very much for your attention.
You get to stay there and answer questions.
Okay, I've come prepared.
Who wants to be first?
John, could you give a short definition of what we're talking about when you say arbitrage?
Arbitrage is where you, it applies to any transaction whereby you look at the market. And for example, we have labor arbitrage at the moment. We look around the world and buy the cheapest labor. But in the financial world, I can say I'm interested in the exchange rate, pound to the dollar. Well, if you look at the various exchanges around the world, you'll see a slight difference, maybe a fraction of a cent. And so you'll buy in one and sell in another with that difference. Now, if you're a hedge fund with literally billions, that's like a quick 50, 60,000, just like that. So that's arbitrage.
Okay, and you mentioned with a single payer National Health Service that you felt that you would have a feedback loop. Can you explain how we're having this feedback loop?
Okay, well the feedback loop comes about because of the huge database that the National Health Service would be having. It's not fragmented. And so the feedback comes about because you can actually track the cost effectiveness of drugs and procedures. And so via this, you see, I'm a great believer. As I said when I worked for Xerox, we had a feedback loop with our performance of machines in the field, and we were gradually, and this is the way car companies do it. I mean, they track their failures, and so they over, and it really like the car we own, the Mercury Marquis. That was produced so long that they actually corrected all things because they tracked everything. Well, if you have this large population of men, women, and so on, you can track these things, and via this feedback mechanism, you actually eliminate bad drugs and bad outcomes. So that's why, and you can improve the efficiency of the system. And the fact that it's publicly owned, the problem really is you have a system that's profit driven. And because it's not arm's length, then there's no incentive really to drive down costs too much.
Well,
Because the public,
2 weeks ago we had a speaker here who was proposing heaven on earth, and he had feedback loop, 3 different levels of feedback loop, and however it really had some pretty strong enforcement. Now, here we've got the FDA, who is supposed to be watching over all of these matters, yet on the average year recently, we've had 200,000 deaths from the proper prescription and proper service, proper treatment.
Opioids,
Not just opioids, across the board.
Well, you see, you have such a fragmented system, but you do not have this overall, you don't have a proper feedback loop, in other words. You have to have the intent to have one.
Well, I think my concern, and maybe someone else might have the same concern, is you're basically saying if the government had even more of my information, then they'd be able to treat me better. Well, when does it cross the line, and when do they start telling me what I have to do?
I think, John, the answer is the government is us. it's almost in this country, it's almost like you listen to Ronald Reagan and the government is always the enemy, and we all have to be armed to the teeth to protect ourselves from when the government comes to take our guns and steal our liberty. Well, other countries don't have that sort of attitude. Because in a democracy, I mean, in France, goodness me, right, the government is as afraid of the people, okay? It's not, and here, apparently the people are afraid of the government. I mean, it's a very curious cultural phenomenon, that.
You mentioned just now about 200,000 deaths. Now, I don't know the amount of drugs that are on the marketplace that are RX prescription, but I know it's a hell of a lot. And I know that at times we do screw up, just like thalidomide in Britain used to screw up, killed, et cetera, all of Europe. So the point of the FDA, I think, does a reasonable job, given the amount of people, drugs, etc., in the marketplace. Can we improve it? Probably. But to blame it on them, or to blame the situation on them, negates the responsibility of the individual as well.
Well, this entire system does not preclude individuals having responsibility, because with the best will in the world, people will do what they do. They will binge drink, they will take drugs and all the rest of it. But by and large, you have this Chackler family who are pushing opioids.
That's terrible.
So, and also you have individuals buying up pharmaceutical companies, and I think there was an AIDS drug that went, he jacked up the price by something like 2,000%.
Yeah.
And so you have these atrocious situations going on. In a national, this doesn't happen in a national. I mean, people trust the National Health Service. Actually, they like it. I mean, the Tory party would love to. They've half privatized it. I mean, look, I'm a product of full-scale social government after the war. Housing, education, and healthcare, okay? Without that, my family, my father came back from the war ill. The conditions were very bad, very bad. Helped along their way by America too, one must add. And so housing now has been privatized. So there's not enough. So Thatcher said, "Oh, we'll privatize housing." She did, and she forbade any more public housing being built. And they were good houses, actually, brick-built houses. I mean, my wall in my house, my 3,500 square foot house, you press the outside wall and it goes backwards and forwards. I mean, my house in Barnet's brick, solid brick, internal brick, solid. So, so this dogma, which Thatcher and Reagan shared, the market is, let's pray to the market. Well, I'm afraid it doesn't work, didn't work, never could work. So what's happened in England now, as I say, she destroyed the base industries, closed them down. So we have generations unemployed. We're selling our assets to pay our way. It's worse there than here. The car industry is totally foreign owned. The infrastructure is basically almost foreign owned. So we sold ourselves out, really, because we didn't have the brains to run things properly. And I lived through it. Growing up in England, we knew the country was defeated on its knees. We had no notion of this grand exceptionalism. We knew the game was up as youngsters. The only problem was we had Victorian leaders who grew up in the age when Britain was the world power, and they just couldn't believe what happened. But what happened was 2 world wars, and the treasury was just spent. So, but we knew growing up that there was no way out. Now, America now is in the same position. It just has not woken up to it. Now, I'm proposing measures that are positive measures that I think would be beneficial. And of course, all things have flaws. But we must, as I say, we must have a trained population, a population that works together. Let's cut out this racist nonsense that goes on. Let's get our heads together. Let's have a party that actually is for the average American and the people, because it's the people that's going to pull this country through. Not the billionaires, not the morons on Wall Street, not the idiots at the top of corporations. But the guy from United Healthcare the other year pulled out $100 million a year. I mean, that's obscene. And as you go through the healthcare system, as I have experienced it, you have all these gatekeepers that can stop treatment. And it can start at pharmacies, actually. You say, well, why did we get this drug? Oh, well, the pharmacies, they knew it wouldn't be paid for, therefore they didn't fill the prescription. What? But you're never told. It's and then so, well, so you have these gatekeepers. A for-profit system like this is immoral in my judgment. Okay? You talk about religion and morality. Well, the religion of greed is what we've got. That's the religion. And it's caused, as I say, it has ruined everything. Wholesale shipping businesses overseas. Fancy asking people to train foreigners overseas to make the same good. I wouldn't have the effrontery to demand that. On Wall Street, the chap used to be here, Joe Allen, who ran a successful clothing manufacturing business in Texas. Walmart came along and demanded that he ship his production overseas. And we had apparel mart. I mean, it was gone. It's just plain, and these politicians who parade down on the steps of the Capitol with their little American badges, and they should be ripped off and thrown. I mean, they're traitors to this country, what they've done. And it's both parties. Both parties.
Oh, I was going to ask you.
Yes, next question, yeah.
What you thought about our government, our declared national emergency? The bill,
Well,
law.
this is
I
all-
don't feel like we're in an emergency. And I live in a border state.
Well,
But anyways, that's what.
yeah, look, in fact, actually, there is no emergency in terms of the flow, because in fact the immigration rate has gone down. Now, whether okay, the problem really is Central America, Latin America, I mean, the total corruption there. People are being given a very, very bad deal. So, they'll throw their children over the wall and, do anything to get a better life. Well, the question is, how many of such educated people can we really take? And really, isn't it better to go to those countries and demand that the people have proper jobs and proper government, rather than, so on and so forth. So, I mean, there's worldwide poor governments, really, because greed is everywhere. And it's become worse, I think. It's become worse. And I'll say again, it ruins everything. It does ruin everything. Julie?
Would you share your comments on, I think it's called universal basic income?
Well,
What it's called?
well, as I said, you know, it's really it's a way of perpetuating this unemployment insurance, if you like, whereas I would like to create jobs so that people don't need it. So you create, and if you, as they say, with a 6-tier system, at the bottom end, you know, you don't need it because you're earning enough to. Now, of course, there will always be cases where people, through illness, divorce, and whatnot, need assistance, and of course, if you have more people working and more people earning higher money, and the country growing faster, you'll have the resources to take care of people, everybody. I mean, it's amazing to me, the Labour government, 1948, introduced the welfare state at a time when, you know, housing, they built these garden cities outside of London. They brought in healthcare system, single payer system. They brought in education through university level. They really performed a miracle and also had a trade surplus to boot because they were still running the Sterling area. I mean, it was remarkable what they did and what can be done with. Now these people were really branded as socialists, but they were really Christians in the true sense of the word. Okay? They cared about the country, they cared about people, and they produced results. And I'm standing here as a proof of one who benefited immensely. And I can never forget that. So I don't want to hear this claptrap about how bad socialism always works, always fails. It does not. Certainly not in my case. Certainly not in my case. And I think that what has failed is this brand of capitalism that we have, which is really corrupts everything, and doesn't produce optimum outcomes, as I've said. So we need capitalism, of course. We need money, we need it to be spent. But we need it better directed and better invested. We certainly don't need it flying around the world at the touch of a button, looking for arbitrage situation, which is what we have now. So, it's... So, next question.
Yeah, you talked about manufacturing, which was highly developed, which was in New York, in the garment industry, which was in South Carolina, and garment, etc. Now, and it has moved manufacturing to places like Thailand, China, various things.
Bangladesh.
The main situation, as I see it, is the American people are not willing to spend $75 for a shirt manufactured here. They are willing to spend $25 for that same shirt. So when you have a manufacturing ability to lower the costs, no matter what the transportation costs are, as an owner, and I am an owner since I own stock of various different manufacturers as well as various different companies, I am in favor of the individual company looking to do the most with their money so that I get a dividend and I get a stock increase in value of the stock, which is generally indicated by the growth of the company as well as the dividends that are thrown off by the company. Now, those countries competition with the many instances of our country in various areas, so that's why that happens. But we have an overwhelming jobs in the STEM industry, which we are not taking advantage of. And we have not shown, or people are just not taking those courses to give us those people to work. Now, you claim the unemployment is 8 point whatever.
Yep,
You know,
8.1%.
the Labor Department is calling it 4%. You know, you might
Well-
be, you might be including, you know, people who are not willing to look for a job. In the same instance, those same people might not want the job, and you're including them, because they're doing something else. I don't want a job. I'm retired and I don't care about working right now.
And the
So
question,
the-
and the question is,
The question is, you know,
okay.
a lot of,
okay, can I answer I understand your question actually, okay? What you've,
a lot of numbers and
No, no,
statistics are used just to play games.
well, a cumulative 20 trillion current account deficit is not playing games, actually. Now, the answer to you is the fact that this so-called cheap garment, in fact, has basically, there is a fundamental hidden subsidy to that price. And that price is caused the trade deficit, which has to be paid for. So in fact, so in fact we are paying for that. In fact, we're paying for it doubly. Because not only are we paying for it, because this trade deficit has to be paid for, okay? It's not free. You're not getting those jobs at those products that's not the real price paid. You have to add in the cost that the whole country has to pay by selling its assets to pay for it. Plus the other price we pay is this loss of jobs. Okay? So we pay for it twice over. And so yes, the average guy running his factory, he can make a wonderful profit by buying low and selling high. But the country, you cannot, the fact of the matter is, you cannot go on in this process. Because just like the UK, in the end, you'll own nothing. You have sold everything out. I mean, all the central London's been sold off. I jump on the bus, it's owned by the Germans. I go to the airport, it's owned by the Spanish. Because there's this one guy wants to bring in these cheap goods. The country's having to pay for that. It's not a free lunch. It is not a free lunch. Meantime, you've got huge social strife because the people at the low end aren't making, $7. Well, in restaurants, the wage is $2.13. And the minimum wage is what, $7.25. You can't live on that. Now, I don't care how cheap this stuff coming in is, most of it is junk. Now, I can tell you that these, like Square D, which makes contactors, okay, for AC, what we're getting is junk. I mean, I got real estate, I fix AC, because I can do electrical engineering. These things don't last more than 3-4 months. They fail. So we're paying doubly for that. Oh yes, they're very cheap, but they're not. They're worth about. I'd say a part like that is worth about $1. Well, American-made ones might cost 50. It'd be worth it. You talk to any AC guy, and what he'll do, he'll scavenge the oldest AC units that are junked to get the parts, because those parts will last. And that's true of a lot of this stuff. It's just junk parts. And we're selling out the country for this so-called cheap products that really are not needed. Why? I mean, you know, and of course the fabrics aren't much good. They fall to pieces. I mean, you know, it'd be better to have American-made stuff, fewer of them, at a higher price. You see, when I grew up, people, my parents, would always buy quality stuff, okay? Because they couldn't afford, you know, going to the shops and buying cheap junk and throwing it away. So you go to a shop, you buy, you know, like a suit like this last 50 years, okay? So the culture of America is just, you know, less of it cheap and more of it, and it's a losing proposition. You can't do it. It doesn't work in the long run. It does not work. Okay, Albert.
Yes, and following up on what you're saying, what about all of those people who are working for the shirt companies producing those very expensive $75 shirts, who suddenly had no jobs and couldn't buy the $25 shirts?
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
I was very impressed with what you said about return on investment, ROI analysis, and I agree with you. I think everyone at all levels in a company should be trained in that. However, that is kind of an ideal system and not actually what I've experienced when I've worked in the corporate world is I found out that the squeaky wheels were the ones that got the grease, and the least efficient departments got all the resources thrown at them, and I watched this happen continually. And so not only that in corporate, but in a lot of government contractors, that seems to be the rule. So how do you propose to change that?
Well, I explained that you do causal analysis. Actually, you look at how the bottom line is created and who's doing it. And you have this feedback loop that says, hey, there's one department, basically, is costing, I mean, you know, it can be done by anything, you see. So, you know, feedback loops which check on things, like the quality of drugs, the effectiveness of drugs, the effectiveness of management decisions, the effect of almost anything can be monitored and checked out and improved. So, and as I say, I used it effectively. I mean, I was put in charge of all the things that were going wrong, and mostly with products. And you know, I ran this causal analysis, and there's a way of doing this actually. I was going to write a textbook about this, but I said, well, why should I give this knowledge away for nothing, you know, to people who don't want it and will never use it? I mean, but yeah, I agree with you, John. I mean, I've seen this myself, and you know, anyway. But I'm glad you liked it. I thought it was good.
You divided into three categories: academic, and then you went through BC and then WC. Don't you have any other categories besides the WC?
Well, you know, I'm talking about my category was academic, white collar, and blue collar. You know, so you know, as a general description, because some kids they don't want, you know, and they can't do academic studies. I mean, but teach them how to, on a lathe, welding and whatnot. You know, these are the people we need in the country. You know, we need this sort of thing. So anyway, sir, at the end, fire away again.
We are in a situation that companies fail. Companies fail because other companies are better.
Right? Yep.
And I like to maintain that situation.
This,
And I'll give you a perfect example of companies succeeding
right,
and the companies failing. Walmart succeeding immensely throughout the nation. Sears is going down the tubes very, very quickly. And if it wasn't for the former CEO who thinks he can save it, should have been dead a long time ago, along with Kmart and Woolworths. That is part of what I see as a capitalist system, and I don't see why we need to dramatically change it. I think we need to maintain it and improve upon it. What I hear from you is to change it.
well, I think we change it because the system isn't working. That's my point. Now Walmart, yes. You know, Walmart, Hillary Clinton sat on the board of Walmart when Joe, I forget his name anyway, Walton, the founder, was proclaiming, "We buy in America," you see. Meantime, secretly, they were setting up a procurement operation to buy from China. Okay? Let me ask the question, I'll come back to you, sir. Walmart, for a long time, pays starvation wages, where many of the people are harassed to death, okay? Amazon is another place that pays starvation wages and harasses people to death, okay? They don't, you know, so it's easy to make money by buying overseas low and selling high over here, okay? But that's not a sustainable situation, okay? And of course Walmart can put everybody out of business, okay, locally. As I say, we have oligopolies, okay, in this country. Now, but I propose now you say, okay, I mean, you know, who is going to stand up and face down Amazon these days? Or Facebook, or any of the other oligopoly situations? Now, as speaking as somebody who worked in corporations, okay, a reasonably high level, it's very difficult to get innovation, really. It really is. Because these people at the top with their stock and so on, which they're given, their stock options, don't want to take risks. And so starting up a new product line, something different, okay? Like Apple, it was in competition with the IBM PC. Now, for years, it was, you know. Now, it turned out that they had a better product, but it took a hell of a long time to prove it. And of course, now the PC, so if you talk to the people, actually, the people that run corporate America are salesmen and bean counters. People that never should be running corporations. Because salesmen, they'll say, well, we must have one just like that one, you see. Well, you're immediately behind the curve anyway. And bean counters will say, we must get something at lower cost. You know, now, I mean, if you look at German industry, it always innovates because they have that sort of culture. So what I'm proposing is a mechanism that where we start up. I mean, I've got these. We need businesses, and they're not necessarily innovative businesses. I mean, where we start businesses for, you know, kids with very limited skills and education, okay, and they can wash windows. I mean, it's a business, okay, and you teach them how to run it and so on. So it doesn't have to be, you know, high tech. But it won't be high tech. Most jobs in this country won't be high tech. Okay, there'll be, you know, maintenance jobs, okay, of repairing robots probably, which takes skill, but it's not the same as designing robots, okay, and the software that drives it all. And I spent my time designing software procurement specs for the telecom business. I made a good business out of that, you know. So, but you know, who can do that? You know? So we need all kinds of categories of jobs. but we need a mechanism to create them, actually. I mean, we need a mechanism that will actually enable people with ideas to go out and start new businesses. Okay, next question.
I have one, Tom. Okay, well, back to the subject of socialism. You know I love that subject.
Well,
There is a phrase, and I'm going to come up with a question here. There is a phrase going around popularly now. It goes, Americans walk their dogs, Venezuelans
Eat their dogs.
eat their dogs. Now, if socialism is a viable economic model, what went wrong?
What went wrong was it was a one commodity country, and the market tanked because of fracking here, and that basically wiped them out. And so, and they have heavy crude that's only processed in the US, and so they're doubly hit.
Good answer.
And so, yeah. So look, you know, I'm not advocating pure socialism. You know, I'm advocating employee ownership, which is not socialism.
Okay.
Socialism is where the government owns everything. And I'm saying, no, let it be owned by the working people, okay? Because you know, we need, see, the fundamental problem is if you're working in a corporation, okay, you're trying to sell an idea. I mean, look, I tell you what's happening these days. I have a friend, Japanese, Finn. We got friendly with him, you know, years ago. He's a friend like my wife, and he went back to Finland actually. And he got totally disenchanted because he would have these ideas, and he would, and another person would be put in charge of running it. And so now he's considering going to Switzerland, because Huawei is setting up a R&D facility in Switzerland. You see, so the Chinese now are tapping into brain power, you know, around the world. Now, you know, the other, I've mentioned this before, I was certainly not, you know, you run a for-profit universities and colleges, and in their mind, oh, let all the Chinese, you know, we'll train. You know, I certainly wouldn't let them anywhere near advanced courses. And I remember giving a talk at Imperial College about some research I was doing back in industry. And there were the Japanese taking photographs of everything I was saying. You know, these people that, you know, they're oblivious really. They're at the top and they seem to have lost touch with reality. I mean, you know, sorry, to carry on, John.
Bernie Madoff went to jail. John Corzine did not go to jail. I'm going to ask you to speculate. What's the difference? What happened there?
Well, Corzine was, I believe, in the political connections, and Bernie, you know, was tried in the public market, you know. But he was one of the few actually. But he got away with it. You see, that's the other thing. The fraud he committed. I mean, you know, it went on, and it was statistically, he could not have made the profits he claimed in the markets. And anybody with the problem really is it's like this you know, the housing bubble and the derivatives bubble that went with it. I mean, in my great book Sabotaging America, it was a bubble. So the Queen, actually the Queen went to the City of London, and she said, well, why didn't anyone see it coming? Well, many did, but they were enjoying it, and they were profiting from it. And then you get the herd mentality that says, oh, it must be good because they're all into it, and we'll put all of our money into it. You know, And you know, you know, any bubble is going to burst. You know, it's the nature of the animal. But nobody sees it. But and many people think they can get out. You can never predict the top or the bottom of it. So, you know, and so again it gets back to greed and people being dim actually.
You mentioned the CPE, the Consumer Protection Agency, and you mentioned that Elizabeth Warren was not allowed to run it. I don't recall who did run that. If you mentioned the name, I would probably recognize it. But one of the things I wonder if you heard about the CPE is they actually garnered $8 billion from regulating companies and companies paying fines, and that $8 billion is missing.
You know, John, as you may have heard me say many times, and I'll repeat it, what these people in office must always remember is they are our public servants, okay? They work for us. Now, when they cheat us, which they do, you put them in jail for a long time.
Right.
Because, you know, when you corrupt so much, and you have such a dearth of honest people, really, people who get, you know, dishonest, you know, it destroys things. I mean, it actually destroys lives, actually, when these things blow up. And so it's you know, democracy is what we've agreed, you know, is the best system, okay? Now, when you do things to destroy it by allowing dishonesty to go on in all walks of life, you know, it's over. And I think we've reached that point in this country. We've allowed corruption to build up to such a degree that it's over. And I'm very concerned, you know, really. And I'm not saying, and I see the same thing in spades in England. Same deal, same thing. So I would have the same complaints, and probably more so. So, anyway, so am I done? Am I done? Questions?
Yes, you have to sit down.
All right, I'll sit down.
Now it's your turn to talk, so whoever wants to be first, come on up here. Either
5 minutes.
5 minutes, you got 5 minutes, whatever you want to say, either for or against what the speaker had to say.
Gee, you didn't know that.
Well, some people don't know.
Well, I enjoyed the presentation. Basically, I agree with your premise and what you were trying to get us to see. And somewhat enjoyed the dialogue between the two Johns.
There's always been dialogue.
There's always dialogue between us.
John only comes to give the dialogue.
I want to deal with a couple of three things, and you dealt with it also. And one of the things I admire what you said, if we get away from bias and everything like that, and try to empower all our young people to do something, be the best thing in education. And someone talked about, you know, I remember when Montgomery Ward, you remember Montgomery Ward? Yeah. And Sears was the great thing. But super large organizations, the staff don't have an opportunity to tell them what they ought to be doing, because they're doing the work and they know how it can be improved. And that's why employee-owned organizations work better, because they're looking for new ideas. Another thing is individual greed that, you know, large number of people have. You indicated you like the dividends you get. Well, that's good, but is that best for the nation? And that's what I think we need. What's best for all of us, not just for a few of us? And that's what you were trying to get us to see. You know, you look at England and what it controlled, almost, you said the sun rises and sets, British Empire, and look where it is now. That could happen to us. And many of the things you said a large number of our better assets in this country are being purchased by foreign nations. A large number. And it's been going on for a long time. And so we are doing that too. I think if we train our people and you know how to program a robot or maintain a robot or digital stuff, you know, those people who do that, they earn a good much money, but we can reduce the costs by being more efficient. And a large number of corporations just deal with manipulation, not efficient. And that's what happened to Sears. Sears had Allstate, it had a real estate company, it had finances, it had retail. And look where it is now. It's because of the vision of people. We pay CEOs huge salaries. And if you study the history of the smartest people in the world in that arena, they may have 2 good ideas in a lifetime. And when they get the highest pay, they don't use them. And they're stuck with the way things are. And I think people, the citizens, I don't think a representative democracy can function if people aren't rational and fairly well educated. And we don't put a great deal of emphasis on people learning economics or learning political science or even learning history. And so, you know, we don't, and a large group of people are not encouraged to go into small business. My father was in small business, but he worked all the time and I was a little lazy. I didn't want to work that way. So I worked for the government. So that's what we got to work with. And just because you get a cheap shirt, like I said, it's not invested. Most of the stuff is made here. It has to go through some kind of quality control test. The stuff that's coming here from China doesn't, we don't have no control over it. I mean, and you know, a lot of things, we just don't have the ability to do it. The government, there's certain things the government ought to do because we can't do it. You know, healthcare, if everybody's in the system, it can be managed better. But if you have some people in and some out, or just have a group of people that's locked in, that are sick and old, the premiums can't do nothing but go up. And I got a real rate of one pill prescription I have that came up with my insurance company. The physician has it says this non-generic is what he got to have. Otherwise, I got to pay the whole cost of it. And so I got to go back and tell my physician what he got to do. And because for the generic drug, I pay $6 for a 90-day supply. And that's cholesterol medicine, that's high if I had to buy it outside. So, you know, we can't know all of that as citizens, but we can know some things that we need to work with. We have a growing number of people in this country, a ratio of people that are going to have to be taken care of dependent because they have severe, you know, mental illness, emotional problems. And it's going to be expensive. We're going to have a huge expense of the people coming that's been involved in Iraq and Afghanistan fighting. Their minds are messed up. We're going to take care of them. It's going to cost a lot of money. We got to rethink about fighting wars. And I know some people here talk about the deficit went up when President Obama was president. It actually went, the difference between expense and income actually went down. But in President Trump is going up $1 trillion each of the 2 years. I don't hear nobody saying anything about that. We all got to be fair and see what's best for the nation and not what's best for a few people. I'm doing okay, so everybody else is doing okay. You know, assuming everybody's lazy. I think people, if they're trained, and a large number of people are locked into communities where they have no models, nothing to follow, and they just do what they're accustomed to doing. They don't think long range, they start short range. It takes a lot of efforts to change those kind of behaviors. So that's how I see it. So I agree with everything you said.
You've already took up your time to do the dialogue.
Guilty as charged. I'll try to make it short. Can openers. I have tried to open, I mean, mostly people have these electric can openers these days. You tried to get one of the old standard hand crank can openers. I think right now the average can opener I purchase works on about 10 cans before it fails. It is deplorable. And it doesn't matter if you pay $3, $4, $6 for it, I mean, they all fail. How many people have gotten a shopping cart wheel that doesn't roll or is you know, making some kind of huge noise on you? This is epidemic in this country. I mean, we can send astronauts to the moon, but we cannot make a shopping cart wheel that, I mean, how much wear can there be just going down the aisles? I mean, it's ridiculous. We have some products that are regularly defective and nobody's really policing. The other comment I've got is we supposedly have liberty in this country, but we really don't have medical freedom, in case you didn't notice. One of the big people sitting on us in that is the FDA. I like to treat myself with herbs, and I go to my favorite herb shop, and they no longer have their mixes available. They said the FDA won't let us. I can buy some packaged herb programs that have been around or grandfathered in. They cost a little more. But I really liked to make my own choice on that. What happened to my freedom there? That's a big issue to me, and that's one of the reasons I'm not looking forward to single payer, because they're already telling me what I can and can't do, and I can't imagine it's going to get better. I'm an anti-vaccine person. I've got 3 people in my family that have been damaged by vaccines. And, okay, I hear some sighs and so forth back there. I mean, I have stories.
So more people sick from the disease of measles than anybody who ever had a vaccine.
You know, I got over measles. I got over measles real quick. I got chicken pox. Polio, actually, the Salk vaccine was infected with SV40. Albert can talk to that probably. We had 100 million people dosed with a slow-acting cancer.
That's where the FDA comes in.
That's where the
He's
FDA hasn't done their job. If he was talking about the cozy, what did he say? He called it the cozy money club. There's no cozier money club than the FDA and the big pharma. And I would call them the crazy money club, because the kind of prices that people have to pay. I mean, you can go over the border. I've actually been to Tijuana just to buy pharmaceuticals for about a 40th. But I've used it one time here. I just say, you know, let the market, that's what Ludwig von Mises said. He said, let the market decide on pricing.
I can just share a few musings of my mind as this talk went on this evening. I heard on the radio this afternoon, if you want somebody to talk about something, give it to a man. They'll talk about it. If you want somebody to do something about it, give it to a woman. So we need more women in this government and endeavors.
It was Margaret Thatcher's quote.
Was it?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't need that kind of
I heard about
One of John's favorites.
We had
Oh, it was Margaret Thatcher. I went, okay.
And John bringing up, it reminded me of the single payer thing. There was an excellent presentation on public radio on Think this week about single payer, just discussing issues involved with single payer for anybody that's interested. Elizabeth Warren I've been reading her book, This Fight Is Our Fight. And she has wonderful, that's the difference between theory and practice, men and women. She talks about the difference, practical examples of how it was when she was in college versus what young people today are facing and the handicaps they have nowadays because of the economy and everything like that. So it's a great book. Education. This afternoon, I looked on my cell phone and it showed Trump Jr. was speaking at a rally of teachers, and he was telling people that they did not have to belong to that loser group of teachers that were asking for better education and better salaries. So regardless of what his policy is, he started off trashing people. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Trashing people, it's, you know, not getting us anywhere.
That's genetic.
He has a beard too.
Yeah, the apple doesn't fall.
I thought it was democratic.
A beard must be the new thing. You know, he had a beard, full beard, mustache, and who are the two guys? Beto and Cruz both have beards now, so that must be the latest thing in politics. Yes.
become Muslim.
Oh, there was an article about their beards in the newspaper. Anyway, education trends. There is talk and there is endeavors of apprenticeships. And they're starting apprenticeships and fostering apprenticeships. And as John said, specialists would go, go to higher education, but apprenticeships get people started, even if they are going into higher fields of education. But the main thing that kept rattling in my brain when John was talking was the word entitlement. Because recently I was speaking with someone that I know, not real well, but I see this person once a month at a meeting. And he was telling me that his sister is in Colorado protesting with the Denver teachers, or trying to negotiate it. And what did I think? And I said, well, it's such a sad state education nowadays, and I feel like racism is behind it very strongly. You can say, let's just skip this racism stuff, but it's very strong in our country. And he said, well, people have choices, entitlement. And it hit me so angry. I don't ever do this, but I just turned right in mid-sentence and walked away and left the meeting. I was so angry at him for his, not necessarily, well, for the word, but also his attitude. And I saw a little kind of a cartoon, I guess you could call it, recently about I was so upset, I couldn't figure out why it bothered me so much. That people would have a harsh attitude, that people don't need a helping hand. And I thought, well, because my family, I have received benefits from the government, and my two brothers did not, and they're desperately, their lives are in desperate situation. Well, one is passed away now, and the other one is in a desperate situation. And so some people do need a helping hand. Some are born with a leg up and some are not. And this was talking about the difference between equity and equity and equality. And it showed a fence, and it had three people standing, trying to look over the fence. And one was a very tall man. He could see over the fence. The other one, he could just barely, his face was just barely at the top of the fence. And the other one was a real short guy. So they put a box under each one, and the tall man was way up high. The middle man could now see over the fence, but the shorter man could not. And that's equality, giving everybody expecting the same, or giving everybody the same. And then they put two boxes under the short guy. and he was able to see over. So it was a clear visual for me of the difference between equality and equity. And we're not born, we don't pick where we're born, and some people need help more than others. And I know some people object to the term socialist, but I heard one time isms are what are dangerous. So capitalism, socialism, it's not tendencies, socialist tendencies or capitalist tendencies. You know, they can be either good or bad as isms when we make them the final answer to everything, that they're a problem. Anyway, that's just some of my thoughts. Thank
I feel like something of us.
Well, John, as usual, you gave a very interesting presentation.
Yes.
I agree with part of it, disagree with part of it, as usual. This nation was formed on some very interesting principles that to me are very highly moral and spiritual in a universal and not a religious sense. They go beyond our little churches and those beliefs. All men are created equal and equal opportunity for all. These are fundamental rights of everyone. And this country gave the greatest economy on earth during the 1800s because of those principles and the idea of free enterprise. But people with great greed in their background, great lust for money and physical wealth and power, like the Rockefellers, took over the oil industry, and suddenly it's becoming a nation of capitalism, which is the focus on greed and lust for power, the focus on material wealth rather than, gosh, I can see that this society could use this product. I'll make a business around it, something useful for people. My dad did that in the 50s. He saw that we didn't have cargo tie-down products in trucks and trailers, so he initiated that entire industry. And that was a very needed product. I know one company up in Pennsylvania shipped aluminum doors and windows, and they would have about $800 or $900 damage per shipment. After the first shipment with his tie-down products, they had $8 damage, paid for the whole system in one shipment. In any event, this is what free enterprise does. Capitalism and greed has taken over this nation, and that's why you have people at the tops of corporations walking away with $100 million a year, or presidents of colleges now getting these huge salaries. And I know when I went to law school at SMU, it was like $5,000 a year, or maybe it was a semester, I forget which. And today I was hearing that undergraduate students are paying $62,000 to go through that school. Not even law school, undergraduate. This is outrageous. Now, we talk about national debt growing. Before we had the Federal Reserve, a private bank in this country, we had the Treasury that issued all the money the government needed with no interest because it was not borrowed money. A private bank took over, we pay the interest, and now we have a national debt. And the Internal Revenue Service was formed to collect from all of us the money to pay the interest on that national debt. Your checks go to the Federal Reserve, not to the Treasury of the United States. The country still runs on the types of taxes that it ran on under the Constitution, import duties, excise taxes, and so forth. Another thing, we look at one administration to another and how the economy changes and this and that and the other. Well, it's got to be the difference in, the Democrats and the Republicans. But when statutes are passed, they often take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 years to really have an accumulative effect. So that when you have suddenly an economy doing well in this administration, it might well have been because of the passage of laws that were years before that. And I think one of the most damaging pieces of legislation we ever had was our country getting into NAFTA, which was originated under the Bush administration and signed into law under Clinton. This has moved millions of jobs out of the United States to all these areas around the world where they can make $25 shirts using essentially slave labor. So what we've done is to bring our standards down to the rest of the world that never did have the values that this nation was founded on. And when it comes to that banking system, again, I've said this 10 times, Thomas Jefferson stated essentially that if we ever let a private bank take over control of our money through inflation and deflation and the corporate structure that will grow up around that bank, they will steal all the property from our descendants and leave them homeless in the land that we have founded. The best administration that I can think of in our recent history was Gaddafi in Libya. You take everything that was in the Western media and flip it over 180 degrees and you'll have a better truth about Gaddafi. He came in as a military leader to stop the warring between two major tribes in his country that were decimating the country and made it the poorest in Africa. And he stopped that warring. He said, okay, you guys have a dispute. We now have a Congress and all the tribes will hear you and decide on it. And they did. He confiscated or nationalized all of the oil industry and made that the source of all the revenues the country needed for free education, free health care for everyone, and very inexpensive housing, etc. I think we perhaps need to confiscate or nationalize the oil industry in the United States and take it out of the hands of those greedy billionaires who do not share the wealth.
Talk regarding industries and the quality of manufacturing, etc. Why did the auto industry go down the tubes? Quality control sucked. And that's why Toyota, Nissan came into power. Because they created cars and built cars that didn't go haywire after 60,000 miles, and I'm a prime example of owning a Chevy Citation, and the transmission went after 60,000 miles. Since then, I bought Toyotas and Nissans, and I have never had a problem with it overall. So we have to look internally about the manufacturing and how manufacturing is done. When we have the Toyotas and the Nissans, etc., who have built factories here, we've gotten some pretty good cars, and they've invested in this country and grown this country in the manufacturing. But when you have your shirt, and this shirt was reasonable, and you have to make it here, and that $75, you're not going to pay for it because the quality is going to be just as good and last just as long, because I have it in my closets, unfortunately, so I never throw anything out. And I spent $20 on it. So you're talking about apples and oranges when you talk about quality of merchandise. Why do they build computers overseas? Because they get decent quality at a lesser cost. Regarding our healthcare system, the FDA is not perfect. They do test drugs extensively, but we have to take advantage of the situation of drugs And there are people in companies that are greedy, no doubt about it. But I think for the most sense, most people in corporations do what the owners of the corporations, you, me, and the rest of the stockholders, through your 401ks and your investments, want. And that's a profit. And this is what this country was made on, profitability. That's why you have companies that are profitable, and that's why you have companies that are going down the tubes. I work for a company right now that their stock went from 72 down to 10. It's called Pitney Bowes. There's no longer a need for postage meters to the extent that there was before. Just like there was no longer a need for horse buggies. Things change, and we need to realize that things change and go to an industry that are more profitable. Not because of greed, because they're more profitable and they produce things that are more profitable. And to rely on people saying, well, vaccines cause this, vaccines cause that, we have to rely on the herd mentality that everybody should get a vaccine so that the people do not get measles and German measles. And a mother who has German measles in the first trimester gives birth with a kid with all kinds of situations. So is this country perfect? I don't think there's a country out there that's perfect. I think we do a damn good job overall. Do we have idiot politicians? Yes, we do. And that's what we're here for, to go out and campaign for the guy that you think can do a better job, not sit here and complain about it. That's all I have to say.
I guess I'm the last one standing, so I want to thank our speaker for doing a great job here tonight. He brought up a lot of good things. In some cases, I think that we have met the enemy, and it is us. Our nation is $22 trillion in debt and growing. Why is this? Some U.S. corporations have become multinational corporations that have physically left our country and left our populace with nothing to go where labor and environmental costs are far cheaper. We lose the jobs in production. We eventually lose research and development as it follows production. We pay more for products, for transportation costs, etc., from these relocated corporations. Taxes to our government are far diminished. The investor class gains, and everyone else suffers. Carried to its logical end, progressive countries suffer. Non-progressive countries are exploited. Nationalistic rebellions ensue, such as Brexit, in progressive countries that are now being exploited, and everyone else suffers as we wander around swatting at snowflakes in search of solutions. That's what we're at. We've got a real problem, and we created our own problem. And part of it is that we had laws in this country. We had antitrust laws to curb monopoly and curb other things from happening. John brought up the fact of employee ownership. The only problem with employer, I worked on that once with the Northwestern Railroad, trying to get it to be employee owned. It didn't work because the Union Pacific ended up buying the Northwestern and it got shut out. So the end result is that corporations are going to continue to exist, and we're going to have to deal with it, and we have to live with it. And you have corporations, they they're strong, even unions don't want to fight. They don't want to create employee corporations because they don't know how they'll represent the people that do the work. So we have problems there. In my view, we need to put tariffs on corporations that leave our country. Apple produces everything in China. They don't produce anything here. There's no jobs here. Why? If they had to pay a tariff to ship the stuff here, they would create jobs here because they don't want to pay the tariff. So then they would produce jobs here. We'd have jobs here in that corporation. And the other corporations that come here from the other countries, I'm not against them. They produce jobs. They don't have to pay tariffs because they're here. If you produce in this country, that's not a problem. It's when you produce in another country and try to sell it to this country, that's when your $22 trillion debt occurs. So we need to put jobs in this country to help ourselves out, and that's the big thing. But now we have another problem, and that is we can't get Congress to act to put any tariffs on corporations because the corporations control the Congress. We get the best Congress money can buy. That's a real fact. And what we have to do is change that. And what will change Congress? In my view, of course, I'm only one person, but I think that if we had free elections the last 90 days of a general election, Congress would end up representing the people instead of representing the people who buy their vote in Washington. Then you could put tariffs on corporations. And once you did that, you could shorten the workday in this country. We go down to a 6-hour day instead of an 8-hour day. We could put more people to work. We could have more people working paying taxes, less people not working draining taxes. The government get a twofold benefit of increased tax revenue without raising taxes. They have less bills to pay for people who aren't working. Look at 1938. They've shortened the workday in this country from 60 hours to 40 hours, the workday from 10 hours to 8 hours. They did not cut the pay. They got the same take-home pay in a shorter workday. It built this country up. It survived us through World War II and beyond. So anyway, I think we have a real problem. The whole world is in automation replaces people with machines. The machines don't pay taxes. Remember that. And people do. And that's what I'm thinking all about. Anyway, give this back to our speaker. He gets to finish this off.
Well, the one comment that Julie made, I thought was apropos. I think we can talk all we like, but it's action that counts, actually, in the long run. And what I tried to emphasize was really positive action. Really cut out all the negative stuff, do something positive. And I think, yes, some of it won't work, and okay, well, we step back and change it. You know, that's what the democracy is for. Anyway, I think the overall, I think gradually there's a recognition that things have gone a bit out of kilter in this country. And so I think we will see change coming. Let's hope it comes before it's too late and we sort everything off, okay?
Yeah.
Well, that's it for tonight. Our formal meeting is over, but our speaker is still here if you want to say hello to him or talk to him. And they kick us out of here at 10:30, just so you know. And that's it. Thanks. See you all next week, hopefully.
You always